So good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's a pleasure to be here and just share some knowledge about Caribbean history, political history specifically. Jean-Pierre Sainton, the struggle for political independence in the French Caribbean. It's not something.
Maël, sorry, could you speak a bit louder?
Yeah, that's right. So it's not something properly resulting from my current research. It's something I want to share. Taking this occasion of Black History Month to talk more about what happened in the West Indies during the 20th century. And specifically, it was an occasion for me to pay homage because Jean-Pierre Sainton was my PhD supervisor, and he passed away in August. So he's somebody who had a very specific path in academia. I think a very singular scholar, and I would say through his path, I can talk about struggle for political independence in the French Caribbean. And I would say as well, we can see maybe how academics, maybe in the 20th century, maybe we have academics doing this in the 21st century, I don't know. But in the 20th century, how some academics were really engaged in some questions, but in the same way, how he shifts from a militant perspective to an academic perspective. But I will tell you more about it. So I am Dr. Maël Lavenaire, Doctor of History, specialized in the French Caribbean history, but I would say more widely specialized in modern and contemporary Caribbean history. And this presentation is, an occasion for me to share, and not specifically an academic presentation or something too much serious, I would say. So I decided to do it after the death of Jean-Pierre Sainton, as I said. And to begin with, I have a question for you. Sorry, just before I continue, just to give some outlines about Jean-Pierre. He was, as I said, a militant, firstly. He became a teacher in secondary school. Then, Doctor of History, maybe, 20 years after he started to teach. And from then on, he became an assistant professor and then professor of Caribbean history at the Université des Antilles. And he was the actual, the president of the Association of Caribbean History when he passed away in August. The Association of Caribbean History is the most, I would say, is the biggest association in the field of Caribbean history. And all about this question. To begin with, can you tell me what you already know about the political history of Guadeloupe and Martinique? I don't know. Nothing at all.
They were originally like mainly sugar plantations. Quite wealthy. They have a big history of immigration with, I think, Indian, Chinese, Lebanese.
And more Indian and Chinese as well. Not
A lot of control from the Métropole, I guess, controlling it. The Bumidum, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, good. Any other thing?
They were like French for more time than some territories in metropolitan area.
Yeah, exactly, because Guadeloupe and Martinique were colonized in 1635, whereas some territories like the region of Nice, for example, got attached to France after. And yeah, one of the important moments in 1848, following the abolition of slavery, is the fact that French citizenship was granted to former enslaved people. And in 1946, we have what we call the Assimilation Act. That means Guadeloupe and Martinique became French departments, but I would say rather French overseas departments, because there is a specific colonial perception about this. So yeah, after the abolition of slavery in 1848, I can talk about, I will try to give you some, a kind of timeline and explain in which context Jean-Pierre Sainton was educated in the 1950s. So in 1848, the French citizenship with the right to vote for the legislative elections for male exclusively was a fact, but it was followed by the removal of this right in 1854. Then in 1875, the arrival of the Third Republic in France gave back the right to vote through the universal suffrage, but denying access to rooming, since it was the case in France until 1944. But for the first class of local politicians, coming from a Black bourgeoisie, but also militant families, this period, the end of the 19th century, corresponded to the emergence of a specific form, a specific claim, which have shaped finally all the political history of the French West Indies from the 19th century to these days. So I'm talking about the claim for the assimilation, which is something very specific in some French colonies. And the idea that Guadeloupe and Martinique with French Guyana could be French departments and territories completely integrated into the metropolitan the nation, instead of the status of colonies. Beyond that, there is the idea that the status of colonies was associated with the idea of inferiority of colonial populations. So it was not only about political structure, but it was about the way people oppressed by racial theories in the case of French colonies could imagine a way to escape from this. Early 20th century, we can talk about the emergence of the labor movement. This labor movement was shaped by the propagation, I would say, of Marxism, and was characterized by a powerful colonial repression. Indeed, as you say, it's the pervasiveness of a plantation economic model with a profitability essentially based on over-exploitation of workers, could not do nothing but enable the birth of the class struggle in these territories. So we can talk about the first great mobilization of plantation workers with a strike in 1900 in Martinique. Then the 1920s were characterized by the growth of militant, specifically with the emergence of communist activists in Martinique, who created the first workers' unions during the 1930s. Nevertheless, as I mentioned, in both French colonies, this class struggle was confronted with colonial repression. So, for example, in 1923, in Martinique, police force killed 9 strikers. After in Guadeloupe, in 1925, police force killed 5 strikers, followed by another killing in 1930 next to the sugar factories. So, you know, what I want to say is that this political struggle since the 19th century and early 20th century is characterized by this question of demonstration of power by the states and the fact that, you know, beyond these political struggles, there is a social dimension which we can understand by, you know, the pervasiveness of socio-racial inequalities in these societies. But to get the political power, each time local leaders faced this repression. It's important because we will see how this repression will be maintained until the 20th century, and how it was one of the characteristics of the political struggle. So, all in all, in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the persistence of this structural overexploitation led to an extreme poverty, affecting not only the French colonies, but in a context that we can observe in all the Caribbean. So I can talk about Jamaica, Barbados, as well as Trinidad and Tobago. And for example, these islands had to face a colonial repression likewise. I'm talking about the killing of strikers and plantation workers in St. Kitts, St. Vincent, Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad. But if we can observe the same colonial repression in British colonies and French colonies, however, the colonial perspective from France on the one hand and from the United Kingdom on the other hand were rather different. On this point, I'm talking about the colonial perspectives in terms of administration, not in terms of colonial interests, because basically, if these two colonial empires at rest, the claims coming from the West Indian workers in the same way, it was because they have the kind of same colonial interest. But in terms of administration, in terms of political power, French insisted on a French political culture, which was based on the so-called ideal of the assimilation of their colonial populations, subject to how far one specific population was actually placed on the racial hierarchization of humanity, established on the 19th century by the white supremacy in Europe as well as in the United States. But the problem is that by pretending the possibility of achieving a full citizenship with this idea of assimilation, this full citizenship associated with the recognition of human dignity for colonial populations. French politics actuated local representatives in the West Indies to make this assimilation the fundamental purpose in the political life of these territories. And that's something which characterized this political life from the 19th century to the post-World War II period. In this new context now of after the Second World War, the claim for the assimilation could at last meet French politics consideration, because it was in France, communists managed to get political power, and they supported the bill claiming for assimilation of Guadeloupe, Martinique, but as well French Guyana and the Réunion Islands. And in this context, a law was voted, the Assimilation Act, granted this, I would say, status of departments to these former colonies. So I'm talking about the law of the 19th of March 1946. What do you think happened from then on? So there is this struggle for assimilation. They want to get a specific thing. And now, I mean now, in 1946, they pivot. In fact, absolutely no shift from the colonial perspective. The implementation of this political assimilation, which started in 1948, actually, was characterized by an all-pervasive colonialism. Also, on the question of the social change expected by the communists, the unionists, and the middle classes in 1946, it was all about a huge range of racial discriminations, acting by a specific social policy in the new departments, therefore called the overseas departments. Overseas departments mean that we agreed on this idea of departmentalization, but anyway, these territories should stay different and should be managed differently from the way French politics perceived administration in the main France. So all in all, this objective of breaking down some frustrations inherited from the 19th century was not. I'm talking from the local forces point of view. And it was a problem. It was a problem because the denial of an actual citizenship, which should have gone hand in hand with the implementation of the social rights, the social welfare, the social legislation, were characterized, as I said, by an unequal treatment in the French West Indies, and this provoked an unequivocal reaction locally. I mean, during the 1950s, I emphasized in my PhD, Decolonisation and Social Change in the French Antilles, how a social political movement was organized between 1951 and 1957 by the local forces simultaneously in both departments, Guadeloupe and Martinique, bringing the private sector and the civil servants together in order to fight against French colonialism, racial discriminations. This social political movement was an historic collective action, and the main reaction locally to just face this all-pervasive colonialism. What's more, at the end of this socio-political movement of the 1950s, definitely, we can observe that this movement actually shaped the minds of the youths, especially. And this movement legitimated the struggle against colonialism in the French West Indies. So we, at this moment, we can observe, I would say, the beginning of a shift between this political culture based on assimilation and the fact that this assimilation failed to really bring social improvements that people were waiting for. And now Now, at the end of the 1950s, specifically from 1957, we can observe that most of political forces locally talked about political autonomy and other status. And this is in this context that Jean-Pierre Sainton was born in 1955. Born in Paris, his parents had to face a terrible winter without enough resources to heat the house, for example. So they decided to send him to Martinique in his mother's family, where he grew up for the first years of his childhood. For the little history, in this history, he discovered in his mother's family, that his great uncle, Pierre Légion, had been one of the 2 Black aviators involved in the Great War. However, when Jean-Pierre Sainton left Martinique to live with his parents in Guadeloupe at the beginning of the 1960s, the political context and the political aspirations had shifted and reached another level. So I can mention, for example, in December 1959, urban riots in the city of Port-de-France, which is the economic and political center of Martinique. And these riots were symbolized a popular reaction of the youths against racist behaviors from the police force and the pervasiveness of colonialism. On 22 April 1961, there is a creation of the FAGA. The FAGA, F-A-G-A, the FAGA, which means in French, Front des Antillais et des Guyanais pour l'autonomie. So it's a kind of organization of West Indians and French people from French Guyana looking for another step in the struggle for political autonomy. And for example, we can find we found the intellectual Edouard Glissant, that maybe you might know, I don't know, as the president of the Congress, which was in Paris. And for example, another important person at that time in the political struggle, who was the writer Albert Béville, called Paul Niger, because he was actually a French administrator in office in an African colony, but he decided to engage himself in fighting colonialism, and he decided to just have a kind name to write. And it's, I think it demonstrates, how we can find some complexity about some different individuals and the way they can be involved in the system, but at the same time use the system and try to fight against the system. But we can discuss it. And afterwards, on 23 June 1963, we have the creation of the GONG, which is an organization, a nationalist organization created in Guadeloupe, literally, Mouvement d'Organisation Nationale de la Guadeloupe. So this picture is, as I mentioned, Pierre Sainton's image captured by the French Secret Services. That means, at that time, with this, with this new step in the struggle, the states, the French states, directed by Charles de Gaulle, as you might know. They targeted every militant from West Indies, or with a West Indian background, and talking about even the idea of autonomy. So when this movement started not talking about autonomy but independence, they became, I would say, certainly they found themselves at the top of the list. So yeah, this image originated from archival investigations led by a professor in France, Maël Lavenaire, who worked a lot with Jean-Pierre Sainton as well. So, and as you can guess, Pierre Sainton was Jean-Pierre's father, which is very important in the story. Yeah, so the creation of the Gong in Guadeloupe was decided after the dissolution of the FAGA by the government. So the FAGA that I mentioned before faced so repression from the government as well. And the Gong was a reaction locally in Guadeloupe, and the idea of organizing the struggle, but now from the islands. In fact, this Gong was created by some nationalist students who studied in Paris during the 1950s and assisted all the students from the Maghreb and the sub-Saharan Africa in the struggle for political independence. So they were shaped by the struggle in Paris and the idea that after the urban riots in Martinique, they had this idea that they had to put this struggle had to lead it another way. So among their leaders, I talked about Dr. Pierre Sainton. He was medicine. There is Jean Barfleur, Arsène Moroz, Claude Macouk, Yves Le Bon, several leaders involved in this organization. And this organization managed to, meetings by meetings, spread this idea of challenging the status of assimilation, and the tactic was actually based on walking on the ground, and they tried, because they knew the surveillance from the government, so they tried to do things, I would say, in clandestinity, and yeah, that was part of the game. What happened after? In this context, in the 1960s in the French West Indies. So another thing I have to say is that when the Gong is created in 1963, this is a context marked by the independence of Algeria, France, and in the Caribbean context, there is as well the independences of Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. So the way the government considered this movement, they considered as this movement as a danger, something which could imperil, the sovereignty, the French sovereignty in these islands. And the fact is that the social hierarchization was not characterized by any specific improvements. So the social frustrations could meet this political struggle for another status and looking for what we can do differently. And yeah, on the 20th March of 1967, we can talk about urban riots in Bastille, which is a political center of Guadeloupe, from the 20th March to the 22nd. And just to give you an idea about how things could be entangled, these riots, it happened after an electoral fraud organized by the government and the prefect, Pierre Boulot, in order to defeat a communist lawyer, Gertie Archimede, a woman engaged in the social struggle and expected to gain a seat in the parliament. And what happened? This event started with a racist aggression made by a Czech settled in Guadeloupe and well known for being racist. And at that time, so we are in March 1967 in Guadeloupe. The prefect Pierre Boulot felt, I would say, the way people can be really engaged in fighting against racial discriminations, the way I would say it was not. And this prefect actually didn't have enough time to practice, I would say, a demonstration of power, because the riots finally declined before the arrival of new contingents of military. And Pierre Boulot was just waiting for another episode to react to popular aspirations. So now I will just let you get to know Jean-Pierre Sainton a little more, because in one interview that I led, he was just telling this story, and the way, because I said Jean-Pierre is the son of one of the leaders. So he was just telling how he experienced this moment, and but with, I would say, his own words. I tried to make the video readable for you because it's in French. So I'm talking about the translation. You can translate things very differently, but when it's about a video, you have to sometimes find the best way to make people be able to follow what is going on. So yeah, I hope you will be able to follow it.
Bien. Je crois qu'il y a une première rupture. Bon, il y a ce fonds d'enfance qui culturellement est important. On se forme dans les premières années, mais il y a un événement, qui n'est pas simplement un événement personnel, qui est un événement collectif, qui est un événement social, qui est un événement guadeloupéen, et en tout cas générationnel, c'est les événements de 1967. Alors, je ne vais pas rappeler l'histoire, parce que en tant qu'historien, je suis revenu dessus. Ça a été le premier travail historique. Mais rappelez qu'en 67, il y a donc ces manifestations de Pointe-à-Pitre. Et ces manifestations de Pointe-à-Pitre qui vont se solder par une fusillade sanglante et par une répression sanglante militaire, armée et judiciaire contre le monde et contre tous ceux qui auraient de peu ou de loin participé à une manifestation de 67. Mon père est arrêté le 26 mai 67 à là-bas. Moi-même, le 26 mai 67, je suis lycéen. À ce moment-là, j'ai 11 ans et demi, je suis en classe de 5e au lycée Barbeau. D'accord. Donc, comme tous les lycéens de l'époque, j'ai entendu les détonations. On habitait à LSE, on habitait entre LSE et Capester. La semaine, quand j'étais au lycée Barbeau, on était à LSE et le week-end, on était à Capester. Et donc, j'ai entendu pendant toute la nuit, j'ai ciné parce qu'on avait de me chercher dans la sécurité sociale et on était à bon, tuer les gens. 5 heures de l'après-midi, LSE. Et je me souviens aussi que pendant la nuit, quelqu'un frappe à la porte, c'est un militant je me souviens toujours, un militant de Capester, et qui demande au pied, nous va chercher le pied. Et c'est là où j'ai compris, c'est là où j'ai compris, j'ai fait le lien entre toute l'activité de mon père, que je connaissais très bien, et à laquelle je participais, les fusillades qui me disaient qu'il y avait une répression qui avait été enclenchée, et les militants qui cherchent mon père parce qu'ils ne savaient pas qu'il avait été arrêté déjà pour faire la ministre. C'est là que j'ai vu. Et le lendemain, c'est là quelqu'un détail qu'on dit souvent, le vendredi 26 mai, on a tué à Pointe-à-Pitre. Le samedi matin, l'école a fonctionné. C'est-à-dire, je suis descendu, toutes les écoles ont été ouvertes. On tue tout le monde, et c'est ce que j'allais dire, on change ce que les mots, ça me dit tout à fait. Donc, le samedi matin, je suis descendu au lycée Guadeloupe, un peu avec l'estomac noué, en disant, mais surtout que les enfants parlaient, les jeunes parlaient des éléments. Alors, moi, je mettais personne de milieu de la je n'avais pas vu les crânes éclatés et tout ça. Mais les autres en parlaient dans la classe. Et puis, à l'Inequality, le général vient me chercher, et bien grave, je me souviens très bien, il y avait 3 surveillants généraux qui étaient là, il y avait M. Tiber, Bozo, Alain Bozo, et d'ailleurs militant qui a joué tellement rôle dans les soutiens des prisonniers, et Michel Benjamin, et ils vont venir me chercher, et ma mère était dans la cour, elle me dit, on a arrêté ton père. Alors, j'étais plutôt soulagé. J'étais plutôt soulagé. Alors, j'étais plutôt soulagé parce que, en fait, quand j'entends par rapport d'autres enfants de militants, enfants de gens qui n'ont pas été, ça a été un drame, l'arrestation. Même moi, ça n'a pas été un drame parce que ça m'a soulagé. En fait, on a arrêté mon père de 2 fois parce qu'il a été relâché. Et ensuite, on a arrêté vraiment. Cette fois-ci, il y avait toute l'armada. Voilà, je vais la Capester, et à ce moment-là qu'il a été effectivement transporté pour la prison de la santé et le procès, comme le procès des communautaires. Alors,
did you manage to understand it? Yeah. So, yeah, just to give more information about what happened in May 1967. ahead of time of the strike, it started with a strike organized by workers in the construction sector. But as I mentioned, there were riots in Bastille just before. So ahead of this time, on the 26th of May 1967, the prefect Pierre Bolot gathered almost 600 police forces, and he was waiting really that something happened. So he found this occasion after the agitation, which followed a meeting organized in the afternoon between employers and workers. And first of all, Jacques Pestor, who was a militant already identified by the secret services, was certainly shot by a sharp shooter from a building once the agitation started. So just to give the context of the slaughter, the problem is that Pointe-à-Pitre knew 2 nights of unbelievable repression led by the military, shooting anyone visible in the dark streets. But the tragedy of this slaughter is that historians still cannot establish the number of people killed during these nights. So Jean-Pierre Sainton talked about an indelible harm in 1967. And after that, so he explained how he became a militant while he was very young, and he was engaged in social struggles. For example, with the strike of 1975, which was a big strike, a massive strike in Guadeloupe. He was a student in history, but he was engaged in this. And he was engaged as well in an organization, which is an organization, UPLG, Union pour la Libération de la Guadeloupe, created in 1978. And this organization became the most important organization fighting for independence during the 1980s. But what happened during the night of the 24th of July, 1984, the tactic of bomb attacks practiced by the militants resulted in a horrible tragedy with the death of 4 militants. Actually, at that time, the government sent almost 30 sharpshooters in Guadeloupe, observing what was happening. And the little story is that among these militants, there was one of my uncle. So I've been affected by this history as well. And after this tragedy, Jean-Pierre tried to understand the failure of the political struggle for political independence. So he decided to meet Rosan Girard, who was one of the political leaders, but during the 1940s, 1950s, to understand a little more the question of political system in Guadeloupe. Afterwards, he decided to he went to a PhD in 1997, and he became afterwards an assistant professor, I think, professor of Caribbean history. He has contributed to most of the important works in political history of Guadeloupe and Martinique, and among his most important contributions, we have 2 big volumes on the Caribbean history, yeah, that's yeah. I can say a lot, but that's what I can say just to give you some outlines about it. So yes, thank you for your attention. And if you have some question, I would like to know if you were expecting I mean these events, did you have any idea of this or not, and what do you think about it finally with your own perspective? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Maël. This was really interesting, and actually I learned a lot I didn't know. So I have a couple of questions about Pierre Sainton, and you were
Pierre
sharing
or Jean-Pierre?
Pierre,
Okay.
yeah, and the 1967 struggle.
Yeah.
Because you know, you said that the government considered the movement as a danger,
Yeah.
and you know, so I wanted to kind of unpick, like, in what sense did they see it as a danger? Did they see it turning into like an Algerian independence movement? Did they see it as becoming part of the Cold War? Because I mean, in that photo, it was May 1st rally, right? I think there was a picture of Lenin in the back.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, because you know, of that period of time, like, did they see that as, you know, kind of like a communist movement and things like that? So that's one, like, in what sense did they see this as a danger? The second is, you know, because you're talking about this period of 1967, 1968, you had all of these movements, right? Particularly emerging in France. So how did those movements relate to what was happening in the Caribbean? Were they, you know, supportive of these struggles, or was it just too far from the attention of the people in Paris? So yeah, those are my questions.
Okay, so 2 questions can be linked. So the picture, the image captures, you know, the gathering on 1st May 1967. So it was celebration of the working class. So I think it's for this reason that in the background we can see that. But so Kong, you know, there was an influence from Marxism, but it wasn't the core of this movement. And the government saw them as a danger because the idea, Charles de Gaulle's idea was that I can give Algeria independence, explained by a specific context with the war in Algeria and I would say an internal context in France. But the idea was that in no way the French West Indies could pretend to independence, because French West Indies had to be the mirror of the French civilization, and how the assimilation, which was an utopia, finally could be something real. And that's something we can really observe in reports made by prefects and high-ranking officials. The idea that in the Caribbean context, with more and more independencies as well at that time, they had to preserve these territories with a kind of it was linked to the idea of the empire, a kind of legacy from the empire, and the idea that these territories had to stay in French, controlled by French, and they became this mirror, in a sense, of French civilization in the Caribbean. And but yeah, the gong was made up of students, I said, who were shaped by other struggles led by Tunisians, Algerians in France as well. So because they studied in Paris, they were, aware of this global context, or at least the French colonial context. So, I think the way they could see the struggle differently from political leaders before is certainly explained by the fact that they studied in Paris and they participated, in a sense, to movements led by Algerians, through students' union and things like that.
So this is kind of a follow-on from the previous question as well. So and correct me if I'm wrong, from my understanding, you're saying that Martinique and Guadeloupe, combined with sort of French Guiana as well, was sort of held differently within the French Empire than sort of Algeria, right? So there was more of a need and a want to hold on to those territories in the Caribbean region. Does that stem from sort of the invasive control that is the history of enslavement, where you're sort of removing people's languages, their ancestral background? So was the ownership and sense of ownership over places like Martinique and Guadeloupe stronger than it would have been for places like Algeria? And is that fueled why there was more of a reluctance to let them?
No, not at that time. Algeria, in the perception, in high-ranking officials' perception at that time, was more important politically. But the idea was that, after the Second World War, Charles de Gaulle had a political power, and he left political power in 1947. But he created this idea of France had to, recover from the war, relying on colonial possessions, because France was affected by the war. I mean, directly, and he already had this idea of maintaining the empire, of modernize empire, because he did not talk about empire. He talked about the French Union, but affirming that in 1946, in no way, these parts of the big France, so its colonies, could really pretend to another status, and in no way autonomy. So he had already this idea of maintaining a very strong image of France based on the French presence in the world. And the idea was just, in this context, if if they lost this struggle, I mean, maybe it was like Napoleon lost the war against Asians. It's the idea of not this part. This part is for person they cannot pretend to maybe be controlled by the United States. The United States were really looking for just getting more power to the Caribbean as well. So there was this geopolitical context as well in the idea that we have to preserve this two small island, but important in terms of political strategy and presence in the world. But if they could preserve Algeria, yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Okay. So at the worst moment of the political unrest, when people were being shot on site in the street, do you know how it was portrayed? Like in France, like what would the press say? Would it be like they will cover it at all? Would it be, is there like a narrative that is totally different from what's happening? Is it, oh, we're fighting for our sovereignty? What would it look like?
I didn't find any I didn't find it in the French press.
At all? No reference at all?
You know, even in Guadeloupe, it was a tragedy in the sense that for a long time, people refused to talk about it. Recently in 2017, some commissions tried to, get some interviews and things like that. But for a long time, it was like, okay, this happened, but we don't want to talk about it because it was really short. Yeah. So even in the press in Guadeloupe for a long time, and it's only when some cultural associations from the 1980s decided to engage more in this in the cultural resistance against assimilation. They started to talk about this event and also tragedies in history a little more, but no, it was not something really covered by the press or things like that.
Okay, I'll be good. Well, when you were describing, the workers and labor struggles in the 30s, it mirrors a lot the labor strikes in the 1930s. It is very similar to what happened in the rest of the Caribbean and from Jamaica. So that was also our labor strikes, 1930s and 1960s, also our political movements. So I was wondering, was there any overlap of intellectuals or militants from the Caribbean, whether Dominica, what's right nearby, or Jamaica and Trinidad that just got their independence, that were able to, whether in secret or overtly, come over to the French Antilles to help?
I think it would be amazing, but no, and French militants did develop connections with Cuba when during the 1940s and 1950s, the political leaders were communists. So the connections, they were looking for Cuba, but we didn't. I'm talking about me and other colleagues. We didn't find these connections with the British Caribbean, but it's part of these colonial legacies. But maybe, history is a long process. So maybe maybe we can one day we will find some secret connections that yeah, because that makes sense, you know. I mentioned my uncle with my uncle who was killed in 1984. So actually I didn't have the chance to know him because I was born later. But I know he had connections with Dominica, for example. So maybe later with the shift in you know, the leaders and the shift in the struggle from assimilation, autonomy to real independence. Maybe at that time they started to grow connections with the rest of the Caribbean. But before that makes sense, but I didn't find it properly.
Yeah, but do we have to stop at one point, or can we go on for a little bit?
This has to be the last question.
Okay, well, I don't want to be the last, I'm your colleague, so please, anyone else can ask, I'll ask later.
Yeah, I'll go. So you talked a lot about what these things have happened and stuff. What is the legacy on the day-to-day? We've seen there's been more autonomy from them with like Martinique joining CARICOM or like their flag changing and things like that, even though they didn't get the colibri. But you know, how has there been on a day-to-day, for example, we don't hear anything anymore about at least the independence movements, or way less. What is it the sort of like potential, like, what is the rhetoric going on, and what is the rhetoric, like what's being said about this, like the national, like the narrative that's going on right now?
I think Charles de Gaulle won the war. I mean, we cannot say that movement for independence are very present in the landscape of political claims or things like that. And I think, you know, what happened from the 1980s, these territories were shaped by some social improvements and a kind of modernization of the societies that we can find in other places. And at this moment, claims for autonomy and independence, I think I would say they knew a kind of breakdown, and it was all about benefit from this status of departments and just keep on the way it is. Yeah, but it's more complex, but yeah. I think yes.
I think that's the end.
So thank you.
If Maël is kind enough, we might still ask questions while we pack up. But,
yeah. Thank you very much for
Thank
coming.
you.